Natural Law, Class 8. All right, so we are now into the particulars of natural law, and we're going to be talking about euthanasia and mercy killing. So-called mercy killing. It's a false use of the term mercy, because to kill somebody is never an act of mercy. To kill an animal is an act of mercy, because the animal has no intrinsic eternal value. But to kill a man, because we have the right to kill, well, we kill animals, so when they get sick, so why can't we do it with human beings? Yeah, well, we kill animals to eat them too. So why can't we do that with human beings? I mean, some of the arguments they give are beyond stupid. So, in any event, I saw this wonderful thing that said, it defined a politician as a man that if he learned most of his constituency means what? The people who vote for him. Is a man who, if he learned that if his constituency were primarily cannibals, he would promise them a regular diet of missionaries. So, that's where we are. Now, we're going to be talking about mercy killing, so-called euthanasia. Basically, it is an individual deciding, basically playing God, saying, we decide that this life is not worth living. Or in the case of euthanasia, I decide that my life is not worth living. Okay.
So so I didn't know there was a distinction between euthanasia and mercy killing. Euthanasia is
it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Euthanasia euthanasia is the more technical name for the popular slogan, mercy killing.
So, but it is the same thing?
It's the same thing, okay. Yeah. What the distinction I made is, I decide that someone else is going to die.
Or I decide that I'm going to die.
Or I decide that I'm going to die, and I'm going to hire a doctor to come in and do me in. All right? And I say to the doctor, send me the bill. But anyway, yeah, so this is a big topic, and I think it's going to take 2 classes to get through, because it's one of the main battles we're fighting today. And as we're going to see, it is also tied in with the battle of so-called legalized abortion. A lot of the same arguments apply to each side, whereas euthanasia is the direct killing of the so-called terminally ill, or those who are defective, like what Hitler did in Germany. If there's somebody was defective, then the government just decided this life was not worth living, and they kill it. So that's on the other end of life, as it were. And abortion is the individual deciding this life is not worth living, and I kill it in my womb. Okay, so it's kind of one anti-life ethic. Pope John Paul II called it the culture of death. I think he was much too kind using that terminology, because we have always been, we have been in a culture of death since when?
Since Adam and Eve sinned.
Since Adam and Eve sinned. They brought death into the world. The scripture says, through one man, death came into the world. And so we've lived in a culture of death since the time of Adam and Eve. What we really have now, and I wish what he would have said, to just hit a little harder, is we live in the culture of murder. We live in the culture of murder. Because killing is not always wrong, but murder is always wrong. The distinction being, well, you can't go to war because the Bible says thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not directly take the life of the innocent and the helpless.
Exactly. The full understanding of the 5th commandment is, thou shalt not directly take the life of the innocent or the helpless. That came from Monsignor William Smith, a moral theologian from whom I learned quite a bit. He was Thomistic. Yeah, he was Thomistic, and therefore structured, highly organized, and really conventional in his presentation. But that is how he defined the proper understanding of thou shalt not kill, is thou shalt not directly take the life of the innocent and the helpless. So just suppose we were invaded by Canada, and Canadian troops were marching down, 1, 2, 3, eh? 1, 2, 3, eh?
Charging in with hockey sticks.
Yeah, that's right, charging us with hockey sticks, and putting pucks in slingshots and things like that. Hockey pucks. But if they... Well, and there was, too, wasn't there? There was a war between Canada and the United States sometime in 1812 or something like that. But in any event, in fact, yeah, there's a story of I think the Americans, one of the sides got hold of one of their wooden warships and set the whole thing ablaze and then set it loose. And it went over Niagara Falls, and they sent it over Niagara Falls. Can you imagine the sight of a huge wooden warship fully ablaze going over the falls?
Are you serious?
Yeah, I figured that was during in the early 19th century, during some sort of skirmish that we had with Canada. But the point is if we are invaded by a country, if an army is threatening us, an unjust aggressor, we have the right to defend ourselves with force if necessary, and that force can include killing the unjust aggressor. Okay, we can do it for ourselves. I can do it for you. You can do it for me. We can do it for people we don't even know. We can do it for our city. We can do it for our country. We do it for our nation when it comes to war. It's all based on the principle of self-defense. Okay, so what we're talking about, though, is murder. Legalization of murder. And the fact that this is against the natural law. We've covered some of this already indirectly, but we'll review it again. I don't know how far I'll get. Anyway, we'll just take our time with this. But this book by Father Smith that was written around 1959, 1960, he opens by saying that mercy killing right now is not so much of a social problem because Hitler gave it such a bad name. Hitler
put everybody into perspective.
The thing is, people saw the raw evil of it. That if you were deformed, you were disappeared. Or if you were sick, terminally sick, you were disappeared. Okay? We can't have any imperfect people walking the streets. It was a really brutal euthanasia program. And so, Father Smith says, for the moment, mercy killing is not too paramount an issue. Hitler's Germany gave enough evidence to discourage many of its advocates in other parts of the world. Okay, those other parts of the world, by the way, was the United States. When the German doctors were drawing up their euthanasia laws, and I got this from Monsignor Smith, they came over to have a talk with a group in California called the Human Betterment League, because there was a huge, raging euthanasia movement in the United States by people like Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood, those types, the type of people who signed the Humanist Manifesto. And so Smith is smart enough, I'm talking about two Smiths here, Father Raymond Smith, the Dominican, is smart enough to say, for the moment, it has a bad name, but then he immediately says, however, tides change, and the old sentimental arguments may well be pulled out again, which argue for and defend the practice of mercy killing. He's saying this beast is not going to go away. It's a good chance it's going to come back. Well, as we're going to see, by 1970, it was back with a vengeance. He wrote this around 1960. 10 years later, it's back. But they became more clever in the way they produce it. I hope I get to that today. We'll see. He says, some arguments look right into the mind of God by telling us that God does not want people to suffer needlessly. Others look at some unfortunates who seem hardly to be human and ask how keeping such a person alive makes sense. Also, the patient himself might request that he be removed from his misery. In any case, the basic argument is that to take the individual's life is the merciful, humane thing to do. Okay, so the person is deciding for themselves that this life is not worth living, that life is not worth living, my life is not worth living, therefore I can hire a doctor to terminate it. Give me a pill, give me an injection, or I do it myself. Okay, so now we're going to get back to this, but rather than first argue about the intrinsic disorder of taking one's own life, Father Smith talks about the medical profession. What will euthanasia do to the medical profession? And also, what has been the driving force of the medical profession?
Well, it's going to make the medical profession lazy because they're going to stop trying to find solutions.
Yeah, you've just indirectly answered the question I was going to ask. What has been the driving force of the medical profession throughout the centuries?
To heal and cure
To
people.
heal and cure people. And to do everything possible to keep that soul, that person, alive. Even in Brideshead Revisited, the doctor, when they're talking, when there's that controversy of whether or not they should call the priest in, and Charles Ryder, who is against calling the priest in, says to the doctor, you have to intervene. And he says, my job is to keep them alive. My job is not to argue whether or not they're better off alive or dead. My job is to keep them alive. Okay, that is what the medical profession should be. My job is to keep them alive. So what does that mean then? If the first duty of the doctor, the nurse, the medical profession is to keep the patient alive, then
mercy killing is going to defy their natural.
Mercy killing is going to defy it, but also what will be the good that comes from that?
They're going to find more solutions.
Advances in medicine, yes. Advances in medicine have really been possible over the centuries because the first duty of doctors is to keep the patient alive, to cure him, to get him better. What did Sherlock Holmes say in The Speckled Band? When a doctor goes wrong, he is the first of criminals. He has nerve, he has knowledge. And when a doctor uses all this medical know-how to devise ways to kill you, well, maybe you're going to lose trust in this doctor and you're not going to want to go to him because you'll figure, well, if he decides that this is too difficult or too much trouble,
he could kill me!
Or if I'm going to get in the way of his golf vacation in Bermuda, he just might snuff me out, and it can come down. We're going to get some specific examples of this, of how mercy killing destroys the medical profession. First of all, by destroying the patient-doctor trust. When you have a doctor who knows that he's going to pull out he's going to pull out all the stops to keep you alive and to cure you, or if you are sick, even as they did with my mother, let's just make her as comfortable as possible. And they gave her little drabs of morphine, very, very small, just to dampen the anxiety and dampen the pain. And I saw what they were giving her. It was very mild. There was nothing wrong with that. But because the group was doing it, when I was there for the little meeting, I said, we keep her alive as long as, we want a natural death. She didn't elaborate on that. She just said, of course, but it's not always that way. So he says, doctors and nurses as well as clergymen are very aware of the fact that a person can be close to death and then rally and live. Medical science is never so accurate that it can predict infallibly that a patient will die within so many hours. And even when the prediction can be precise, the doctor still struggles to save the life. You save the life, you make them as comfortable as possible. You don't say, they're going to die next week, so let's just give them an injection now. Also, he says, and I talked about this, we must not overlook the terrible psychological block that would arise with the patient and doctor to know that not health but death might be the object of medication. Again, the destruction of the patient nurse-doctor relationship. And so, after Hitler gave euthanasia such a bad name, he actually didn't give it a bad name. It has a bad name to begin with. He just showed the real... He just laid bare what the evil is. Mm-hmm. Okay. So people say... People do say, and I fall into it too, I see Hitler gave euthanasia a bad name as if it's if it's a girl with it's a girl with a good reputation who's being slandered. No, euthanasia is evil in itself. And so, the World Medical Association in 1948, there was a declaration, and the World Medical Association was sane enough at the time to recognize the evil of this. So right after Hitler's Germany and all these atrocities, and the world knew that it was doctors who were killing people in Hitler's Germany, perverse doctors. I'm sure there were some who were probably put to death because they wouldn't, or put in the concentration camps because they wouldn't go along with this. The 1948 Declaration of the Geneva World Medical Association, it says, quote, very short sentence, "The health of my patient will be my first consideration." The health of my patient will be the first consideration. And so, the Hippocratic Oath that doctors at least used to take, I don't know if they still do, and if they do take it, then I don't know how they can be involved with any sort of abortion or euthanasia. I understand the first principle is, first, do no harm. And they used to say, I swear not to abort, I should get the wording. I didn't think to look that up beforehand. But they would swear to do that. They can't swear to do that anymore. So it's like the removal of the oath against modernism.
I could look it up if you wanted.
I don't need it right now.
Okay.
But like for example, Monsignor Fenton, I was just reading his diary, and he was complaining about the fact that right before the Second Vatican Council, he thought the proper thing to do would be for everybody involved with the council to take the oath against modernism again. Well, they didn't do it. And they couldn't do it because they were about to invade the church with modernism through Vatican II. It was the same thing, similar thing with the Hippocratic Oath. They have to either not take it or change the wording. So, we know that man must always act in keeping with his nature. Disease and sickness are contrary to the physical nature, and so it has to be fought.
Wait, hold on. Sickness. Contrary to nature.
Contrary to our physical nature. And so we fight it. And also we don't just give in and have the doctor kill us or have the doctor kill our loved one or someone who's inconveniencing us. Oftentimes they say, I want to put grandmom out of her misery. What it really means is I want to put her out of my misery. I don't want to be bothered anymore. It's too much trouble. So, suicide is against the natural law because, as we learned from Father Smith in this booklet that I'm using, and you learn from any moral, or I should say ethician, like Dr. Waters or Dr. Burnett or Dr. Feser, Edward Feser, that what is the first instinct of man? Preservation of life. We talked about that in this book. The first thing he says is that man always fights to keep himself alive. Self-preservation. Self-preservation, we see it in animals and we see it in man. All living things strive to live. That is the nature of things. If you've ever gone fishing, when you catch a fish, it fights. You have to, especially the big fish, you have to learn to play it. I remember going fishing with my father, and it would really be obvious this fight to live if he caught an eel, because the eel goes berserk and it's got that long, snaky body that is just twisting and swishing. You can see the fury of this thing to keep alive. Okay, it's the nature of things to keep yourself alive. It fights like fury to live. If you what do they always say about a raccoon?
Don't corner it.
Don't corner it. Don't corner an animal because it's going to fight to preserve itself.
And oftentimes you will not win.
You will not win against a raccoon. You will not win. It'll fight like fury, slash you up, and give you rabies to boot. Okay, so people who are really sick. Now, Father Smith made this thing too, that sometimes you see them clutching at their sick in bed. Their life is slipping away, and they're clutching at their bed sheets, as if, symbolically clutching onto life to live. So it is. So we see in nature. Nature says, I want to live. Nature says, I want to preserve my life. Nature says, I want to fight. I'm going to fight to keep myself alive. So to come along and deliberately kill that, cut that off, whether it be in abortion or whether it be through euthanasia, is contrary to nature itself. It's against natural law, and also we can see that from nature, and it's also against divine law, fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, which actually fully means thou shalt not directly take the life of the innocent and the helpless. Here's what St. Thomas Aquinas teaches. He says, God alone is Lord of death and life, for by his decree both the sinful and the righteous die. Okay? God alone is Lord of death and life, for by his decree both the sinful and the righteous die. Okay, so it is, Monsignor Smith used to say, if man wants to play God, then he better make sure he plays God the way God plays God. And that is that God alone is the one who has the right to take the life. Because where did we get life? Did we give life to ourselves? As Dr. Waters would say, if we gave ourselves our own existence, then we would have had to exist before we existed, which is absurd.
Which is absurd.
Okay? If we gave ourselves our own existence, then we would have had to exist before we existed, which is absurd. We have existence given to us by God, and that existence is not a deist type of existence where he kind of winds us up the way you wind up a toy and let it go, or the way you send a drone out to deliver your package, the way Amazon wants to do. Well, I can foresee all types of problems with that. One person in the comm box on the report of this, he says, "I've got my paintball gun ready."
If one comes from I probably know him.
So in any event, so God keeps us in existence through an ever-present act of his will. Remember, God did not only create us, but he keeps us in existence. He is always, as the philosopher would say, oh no. He is always continually pouring being into us, given being to us. And as such, we are not free to take that being away, either be ourselves or another, except in the case of legitimate self-defense. Okay, how long have we been talking?
Not wrong enough.
Okay, yeah, we have a little time for the next section.
Yeah. Oh, where are you going?
And that is, I want to show that the natural law arguments that we talk about, the enemy is well aware of them. But the enemy makes a point of not openly talking about it. But instead, they come up with media slogans and media sound bites And as Madsen and Kirk said, they muddy the moral waters. They deliberately muddy the moral waters. That's what two top rainbow strategists, two brilliant men, Kirk and Madsen, said about making their lifestyle more acceptable. We will muddy the moral waters. These men are causing confusion for the sake of an evil end. But we see the same thing here. Yes?
Are they still alive?
I don't know. Probably. But anyway, Monsignor Smith talked about this, and I looked it up. California Medicine. Now, this is a medical magazine. September 1970, volume 113, comma, number 3. Okay, California Medicine. Now, this is actually a ferocious pro-abortion editorial written 3 years before Roe versus Wade was decided upon, that claims that the Constitution allows mothers to kill the baby in a room based on the freedom of the individual to choose what they want, which is nonsense. But what it does is, we're going to see, we had this little series of classes on the Humanist Manifesto, and we're going to see the effects of the Humanist Manifesto and the thinking of the Humanist Manifesto playing themselves out here. Because they talk in this little known they talk in this editorial of the old Western ethic and the new Western ethic. The old Western ethic and the new Western ethic. And California Medicine, the old Western ethic is the traditional one based on Aquinas and Augustine and Scripture, and the new Western ethic is based on sheer, godless utilitarianism. What does utilitarianism mean? What does utilitarianism mean?
Well, it has to do with self. Positive will.
Not so much that. That has something to do with it, but utilitarianism means this is for the sake of utility, for the sake of usefulness.
You see.
So utilitarianism is an entire moral structure based on whether or not something is useful. Okay, so you see where we're going with this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm quoting California Medicine. California Medicine, it contrasts the traditional ethic and what they call the new ethic. Now these things are very helpful to us because when we see all the business going on, the woman's right to choose, all these slogans, all of that is superficial. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the real battle that's going on. The two radically ways of looking at the value of human life. Okay? Quoting from California Medicine, Western ethic, quote, has always placed great emphasis on the intrinsic worth and equal value of every human life, regardless of its stage or condition. Okay? That's better defined than some pro-lifers I've heard. It's concise, it's to the point, it is accurate. So the Western ethic has always placed great emphasis on the intrinsic worth and equal value of every human life, regardless of its stage or condition. What have they covered by saying stage or condition?
Abortion and old age.
That's right. Abortion and old age have been covered by that. Its stage of development, which we usually associate with the baby in the womb, and condition, what's it look like at the end of the life, or what's it look like after it's born? Is it missing arms? Is it missing legs? Is it missing toes? Does it have, I don't know, is it retarded? Is it imperfect? Can't have an imperfect baby. Okay? But Western ethic says it doesn't matter. None of that matters. The human life has intrinsic value of its own. This ethic, it says and admits, is blessed and reinforced by Christian heritage, and has been the basis for most of our laws and of our social policies. Okay? Very open. Dead on accurate. Christian heritage blesses this. Christian heritage actually came from our Christian heritage. And this has been the basis of social policies and laws. The laws are based on this truth, that every individual has intrinsic value no matter what its stage or condition. But now it says, and this is the ethic that California medicine favors, now we see the emergence of a new ethic that focuses more on what is called the quality of life, that places a relative value on human life, not an absolute value. Okay?
I think it's it's awful that they would say that.
They say it openly.
The gall to say that.
They say it openly.
Everything that it entails.
The problem is, well, I'll get to it. So it doesn't have an absolute value. Now, here's the interesting thing. You hear all this talk, well, when does human life really begin? Is it a human being? Have you heard those discussions?
Yeah.
Well, how do we know it's really a human being? Someone asked Barack Obama that question. When does in the womb, Mr. President, when does human life begin? You know what he said? When does human life begin? Well, the answer to that is above my pay scale. He ducked the question, didn't answer it, said it's above his pay scale, which means I don't get paid enough to know these difficult medical questions. And he portrays himself either as a conniving liar or a moron. Okay, he's a little bit of both, but conniving liar, really. He knows very well when human life begins. Why? Because the authors of this California Medicine editorial state flat out, we all know when human life begins. Quote, everyone really knows that human life begins at conception and is continuous, whether intro or extrauterine, until death. That's either inside the womb or outside the womb, okay? I'll say that again. I'm quoting directly the editorial. Everyone really knows that human life begins at conception and is continuous, whether intra or extrauterine, until death. So, here's what the magazine goes on to say. The question of when human life begins is not the problem. Because we know it begins at conception. We know that. Everybody knows that. The problem is that there are too many people out there who are hung up on this old Western ethic that every life has intrinsic value and therefore killing is a bad thing to do. That's the problem. This is 1970. That's the problem. There are too many people still hung up on Augustine and Aquinas and these so-called natural law ethics that gives intrinsic value to every human being from birth until natural death in every stage of development and every stage of condition. And the real problem is there's too many people who still believe that. Hung up on the old Western ethic. That's the term that Monsignor Smith used. The killing is socially abhorrent. The killing is wrong. And so what does the editorial say? Again, 1970. It basically says that if we... Now, he's going to be talking about abortion, but we're going to see it's the same argument for the end of life. Says, if we want the abortion movement to succeed, then it is necessary for us to separate the notion of abortion from the notion of killing. It's a whole new public relations campaign where you fiddle with the language. Monsignor Smith used to say, and you can write this down, it is a great observation. All social engineering is preceded by verbal engineering. That's Monsignor William Smith. Write that down. It's a good one. Quote, all social engineering is preceded by verbal engineering. When you want to start to change the ethic, the first thing you have to do is change the terminology. Get rid of the old language, bring in a new language, often that is imprecise, and often that appeals to the emotions. Now, this is exactly what the pro-abortion forces did. They changed the language. So instead of calling abortion killing, they called it a woman's choice. They stopped calling what the woman was carrying a baby, they call it the fetus. They give it this cold medical term, the fetus. They start talking about removing the product of conceptus. Okay, the baby is conceived and we're going to remove the product of conceptus. They're going to call it termination of pregnancy. They're going to call it a woman's right to choose for herself what she wants to do with her life. You call it anything, but don't call it killing. It is what they employed, and that is why, if you see when I write, I never use the term pro-choice. I can't get over how many pro-life organizations use the term pro-choice.
Because it sounds, even when you're talking about what it really is, it still sounds
like something positive. Sounds like something positive. And they're using the enemy's terminology. You know, I was talking to Mom about this the other day. You haven't seen The Prisoner. The Prisoner, but the... what's the name of the actor who plays? Patrick McGowan is placed into the society where everything is decided for him. Everything, his life is completely programmed. It's like the Truman Show, really, in a way. And he's given a number. I forgot, what is his number? He's number 6. He's given a number, and every time they call him number 6, he says, I am not a number. I am not a number. He's constantly and consciously resisting this new false social system that he is being inserted into, and he does it every time. I am not a number. I am not a number. I am not a number. And this is the type of thing we need to do with the modern terminology and modern things that are foisted upon us. He never used the term pro-choice to describe Barack Obama. He's pro-abortion, the butchering of unborn babies in mother's womb, bloody butchering. Nancy Pelosi, the so-called Catholic. Joe Biden, the so-called Catholic. John Kerry, the so-called Catholic. They call themselves pro-choice? No, they are pro-abortion. They are pro-murder. Okay? Don't use try not, and you're going to get bombarded with this at UB, to recognize the enemy's terminology. Now, doesn't mean you have to fight them in class, just so you know what's going on. So, but pro-choice, what has it done? It separates the notion of abortion from the notion of killing, and so they can get on with their new ethic that they're going to decide life and death based on a relative value of life, based on the quality of life, quality meaning how good it is, or whether or not I want it. And they're going to eclipse the old ethics with this new positive slogan. And this is what we see now going on the other end of life. Instead of calling euthanasia or assisted suicide killing, they call it the right to die. They call it death with dignity. They call it painless release. The right to die, death with dignity, painless release. And we're going to close with it. There's more to say. But once you say, and we've talked to a number of things that's wrong with this, but another aspect. Once you say that abortion or euthanasia is licit, is lawful, for a solution to a personal problem in my life, once it's okay for me as an individual,
then it's okay for other people to do to me.
Not only for other people, then governments can enforce these things for reasons they consider to be necessary, such as population control, so-called. Governments can enforce it because you've already said it's good for you, so we say it's good for us. And I know we're critical of Paul VI, but his encyclical Humanae Vitae, it could have been a little better, but at the same time, he did reinforce the traditional teaching against birth control and abortion. And he basically said in that encyclical, if this is a licit procedure for the individual, then it can be considered a licit procedure for governments. Then what is to prevent governments from enforcing these immoral policies? And as Monsignor Smith said, Paul VI's prediction has come true in every country of the world, including the United States. One of the big things the United States does when they're giving aid to African countries and things like that is, in order to get their financial aid, they also have to accept this massive birth control, population control program. And our friend Bill Gates from Microsoft is a huge proponent of this population control as part of government aid. So, if abortion is okay, then what is to prevent a nation from mandating abortion, as they do in China? In China, you're only allowed to have one baby. And the so-called Catholic Joe Biden, who went to China, he either didn't say anything against it, or he gave a mild, yeah, that's okay type of thing. So again, these are all the things we have to consider when we look at euthanasia as an affront to natural law and as an affront to divine law. And we're going to pick up on the next class on this, on kind of a detailed exposition of where this has gone, like the Netherlands, how many people the medical profession has killed in the Netherlands under this new system. The fact that when Sarah Palin talked about Obamacare and saying there's going to be death panels, the government is going to be deciding, and everybody was saying she's crazy, how she's not crazy. This is the thinking of these people. One of the groups that was involved in putting together Obamacare was the Hemlock Society, which is a euthanasia society. And they were involved in the drafting.
And they've been around for a long time.
And they've been around for a long time. They've been around for a long time. And well, we're going to talk a little bit too about how it destroys the medical profession. And so that's it for today. We'll pick up on that, I guess, on Monday. And I hate to say it, but one of the main reasons, of course, this is taken off is the hierarchy, the present-day hierarchy, as Cardinal Burke said, has fallen down on the job. They should be up on their hind legs screaming against this. They should be refusing communion to so-called Catholic politicians who endorse these policies, such as Joe Biden, such as Nancy Pelosi, such as John Kerry, and they don't. And they let the beast destroy the countryside when they have the duty
and the ability.
But for a long time now, even prior to Vatican II, the criteria for choosing a bishop is, what I want is someone who will get along with everyone. You mean someone who doesn't have strong views on anything? Yes, precisely. I've said this so many times before, there are many priests, even inside the parishes, saying the Novus Ordo, who would make fierce fighting bishops They are not chosen. When Archbishop Lefebvre was called back from being apostolic delegate to French-speaking Africa, and everybody knew that Lefebvre was a strong, doctrinal, Thomistic, counter-revolutionary, counter-liberal bishop. When John the 23rd was going to bring him back and place him in France in 1958, 59, 1960, the French bishops went berserk. And they laid down 3 conditions. First, that he would not be given a major diocese, but a small diocese. Now, he was apostolic delegate of French-speaking Africa. He should have been made a cardinal. He should have been given Paris or, one of the great sees. And they said, no, you can't have that. You can't have that. He has to be given a small diocese. The diocese he was given did not even have 1 million people. Secondly, I'm forgetting all 3 of them, so I could never make a good lawyer. Your Honor, I want to make 3 points. I'd make my first point and I forget the other 2. Second is that he would have no say he would not be part of the bishop's conference. He would have no say. They didn't want him there because someone like that rocks the boat. And when you see a true bishop stand up, Catholics rally around them, and it makes the other bishops look like the spineless saps that they are. That's why Cardinal Burke right now is hated, because he's standing up. Cardinal Brandmuller recently said that anyone who says that divorced and remarried can receive communion are heretics. And this applies to bishops. He said it openly. So they don't want men like that for the most part. And so the Catholic Church has the ability to stop this. Father Gruner always talks about the fact that the root of the word bishop means watchman, the watchman on the wall, who will sound against the enemy. And the men that we have don't do that. There are men who can do it. They're not chosen. The men who do it are facilitators of dialogue, facilitators of communion, all this sappy, effeminate, that makes their life easy, really. We know how hard it is to talk to a friend and say, well, there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church. It's hard. It's hard. The bishops don't want to do that publicly. So they change the policy so they don't have to do that publicly. But anyway, we'll talk more about that next time.
All right.
Sound production, Oltyn Library Services, all rights reserved. This recording may not be reproduced without explicit permission of Oltyn Library Services, www.oltyn.org.